Podcast. This is Comedian Nazareth, and thank you so much for joining us. Also, thank you so much for making us the number. We're number 66 right now. I don't like that number, but we're number 66 on this stand-up comedy podcast in the whole nation, I think, or in the U.S. We're number 66. We're doing even better in New Zealand. We're doing better in South Africa and other places. So praise God for that. Thank you guys so much for subscribing. I want to encourage you to encourage your friends to subscribe to our podcast. And as you know, this show is called Laughter for All, but now we're not always bringing guests to laugh with, but guests that can help us and can give us some advice and can really make our life better, easier, more palatable during this pandemic or post-pandemic or wherever they think we are right now. So I would like to invite a friend of mine. I met her through her son. Her son is a very funny comedian who used to open for me, and I used to mentor him. And Andria Sigler-Smalz sees clients at Journey Christian Ministries. She holds a BA in Christian Counseling and an MA Master in Theology. In addition to experiencing her own therapy, she trained through supervision for 9 years with a licensed psychologist to integrate theology and the best of psychology to assist her clients in dealing with their real life problems. In sessions, you will experience compassion, grace, and practical assistance. For everyone, life gets hard at times, and for some, life has always been hard. So, I'd like to welcome my friend, Andrea. Hello, Andrea. Welcome.
Hey, Nazareth, thank you.
Thank you for being on the show. I know you're very busy, and I know you probably, people pay you for that hour. So, for us to have you here, that's a treat for us. So thank you so much. Tell me, first of all, why you're doing what you're doing. I mean, what got you into that? What was the trajectory of your life that got you here?
Okay. Yeah, experiencing healing through my own therapy, personal therapy, back in the 80s. And then I was also a very active member of a church. I was on pastoral staff at the church. And I saw that there seemed to be a subset of Christians in the church that were always on the fringe. They had, problems that just destroyed their quality of life. They couldn't seem to integrate into the church body life. And I wanted to help them. I returned to school and got my degrees and started working, under with case consultation with a psychologist. Developed a counseling ministry there with Hope Chapel Torrance, Hope Chapel Community in Torrance at the time. And what we did is we co-trained therapists with theology and pastoral counselors with psychology, which was kind of unheard of back in the 80s then. And we developed a counseling center, and so that's how I started.
Now, your title is a clinical pastoral counselor.
Yeah,
That
I'm a pastoral counselor, but to some people that conjures up the thought of a pastor who prays with you and reads you a couple Bible verses and then refers you somewhere. So we tried to find a word that kind of differentiated that pastoral counselors that have more training than that and who will work, the long term. I do make referrals at times if what the person is dealing with is not in my scope, but there's many things people deal with that they can come to me for. So.
Right. I just want to give this disclaimer in the beginning. Even though Mrs. Andrea is a professional, she's a professional counselor, I want you guys to know that whatever questions, answers you hear here, this is just, if you want to, go, oh, this is what I heard. you know what? You can go professional. We'll give you the phone number for Journey Christian Ministry at the end. You can talk to her. You can set up appointments. But right now, everything we do in this show is just suggestions. There's nothing, this is not a medical show or a clinical show. This is two friends talking, and I'm using your experience as a clinic. Now, what do you say to Christians who say, "Oh no, we don't need any of that. Just read your Bible and just pray, and everything will be fine."
When I hear that, I'm always interested in knowing what their concern is. Why they think that this is not biblical to use professional services, whether it's a psychiatrist for medication or a psychologist or marriage family therapy or even a pastoral counselor who does more than pray with you. So I want to know what their concern is, why they think it's unbiblical, so that I can deal directly with their concerns. And oftentimes they they somehow have the idea that God should be enough, and that if a person is spiritual enough, prays enough, that should be enough. And if their problems don't resolve, then it's maybe a lack of faith, or God just wants to see them suffer longer, or something else. So, I mean, for that, we really kind of have to look at Scripture. We have to see how um, the Bible speaks about things like anxiety and low moods and how they're a normal part of life. And God never meant to be everything to us. If He did, we wouldn't need husbands or wives. We wouldn't need friends. We wouldn't need churches. That God created us need-oriented beings. And in that, we need each other. And sometimes we need the gifts that God has given other people. Sometimes we need medication, just like a thyroid isn't working well, or somebody has hypertension. They're okay with taking medication for that, but it's really no different.
Because you know what, there's this old mentality that if you have a mental illness or you go to a therapist or counselor, you're crazy. There's a problem with you. Have you experienced that from patients that come to you or their families or don't want to come to you?
I experience that more with older generations. I think people are becoming more acclimated in understanding that everybody needs help sometimes. It doesn't mean that you're crazy. It doesn't mean that you're defective morally. Or
All right. And now, being as a clinical pastoral counselor, you said the Bible addresses anxiety and depression.
the Bible
Can
address
you give us idea? Some.
Sure, the Bible addresses some parts of it. It acknowledges that low moods are a part of life, and I want to differentiate though between anxiety and an anxiety disorder, or low mood and sad feelings and depression, because sometimes people think that they'll say I'm depressed, but what they're really saying is I have sad feelings, or I'm
Mm.
having a period of a low mood. Sometimes people will say, they'll think they have an anxiety disorder or something's wrong with them just because things make them anxious in life. But anxiety is a feeling God wired into us. It's just like other feelings: happiness, sadness, anxiety. Um, and it has a very significant purpose. For instance, if I'm driving in the freeway in a storm, and it's lightning and thundering and it's raining, I will be anxious. And that anxiety is telling me to stop, look, and listen. It's telling me slow down, turn off my radio, stop chatting with the person that's in my car with me, and focus
Mm.
and be careful. So without anxiety, if we didn't have anxiety, it would be a dangerous world for us. But that is different than having an anxiety disorder.
So, what do you say about where the Philippians 4 it says, "Be anxious for nothing"? How
Okay?
do you?
Yeah. And when we look at that verse, it's telling us that anxiety is normal. If it wasn't for the fact that we have anxiety, he wouldn't tell us to be anxious for nothing. And then it says, in all your anxieties, right, to cast your cares upon the Lord, to submit this to God. He'll bring peace to you. And that does work for many people when we realize that we can trust that God is going to take care of whatever circumstance it is. That is different than somebody who experiences a severe anxiety disorder.
Okay, let's say I come to to your practice. Is that what they call practice? Even though you guys are not
You
practicing
come
your
to our
real
ministry.
your ministry, yeah, and of course you're gonna give me a discount because I'm your friend. How can you tell if I have an anxiety disorder? I'm just one of those worrisome, anxious person, always like worried about stuff.
Hmm. Okay.
How can you diagnose me or something like
Anxiety disorders have some very specific features. People will feel anxious for no reason. So, for instance, the example I gave you, I'm anxious. Why? There's a rainstorm. I could get in an accident, or I'm having an exam coming up, and I'm not well prepared. So, anxiety, when it's just normal anxiety, it has a reason, and we can pretty well identify it. So, people with anxiety disorders, there seems to be anxious for no reason. They have difficulty just doing simple things, daily tasks, because they just get so caught up in their brain. They have a hard time finding people to understand them, because people will say, "What's wrong with you? Your life is wonderful. You have money and 3 meals a day and friends and this." And they don't have a reason for it. It's going on inside them, and they can't stop it. They might have difficulty sleeping. They might have trouble focusing on the good, because life for them is like, even the good things, walking on a beautiful beach, but it would be like you have a big blister on your foot. They have trouble really enjoying anything. It comes and goes, no rhyme or reason. There's certain features to anxiety disorders that you would look for.
Yeah, someone, Serena Zahar asked the question, where does being anxious for no reason come from?
That is a hard question. That is a very individual question. So I wish I could say, it comes from X, Y, Z. But for different people, it's different. So for somebody, if I were to look at a variety of reasons generally, I could say that for some people, it seems to be in the genes. It could be hormones. It could be thyroid. It could be uh, child of origin problems, past rejections and abandonments, unresolved grief. I mean, really, a therapist or a counselor has to sit person by person to kind of help get an idea of where their anxiety originates.
Andrea, I took an 18-week class about counseling God's way, and in the class, the instructor was saying, he said, a lot of secular, people, like Freud and Jung and all these guys. He said, I don't even know why people go to them, because these people were trying to explain life outside the Bible, outside God's idea of life and why we're here. And he was mentioning something like a lot of these mainstream psychologists, what they do, or therapists, they try to focus you on yourself and your problems rather than looking into God and how the Bible said you're nothing, we're nothing, we're just dust. And what do you say to that? What do you think about that?
I guess I would be curious why it has to be either or. Why does it have to be we only focus on God and ignore the gifts that He gives other people to help in the body of Christ, which we have several verses that talk about how He gifts people and that the whole body works together. So why does it have to be either or? I mean, one of the jobs of counseling therapy is to help somebody become a more productive person in life, to function better. And a part of that functioning is being able to love others, minister to others, love your neighbor as yourself. So there's some self-love there in order to love your neighbor that way. God loves us. It's okay to experience His love. Uh, it's it's okay to have gifts that you want to offer, but you have to get to a place in life where you're capable of offering them.
Right. Now, do you guys in your counseling, you have people lay on the couch, right? Is that what
No,
you do? No couches?
no,
You don't have a
no.
couch?
I don't have a
You,
couch. I'm such a disappointment.
you know what? Ashley Furniture have them on sale right now. But that's the that's the idea. But so let's say when you meet, do you you know how sometimes, I don't know, is this could be a stereotype thing, like when you sit and you start to get back to your inner child. Do you guys do that? Do you do that? You go back to their inner child or all that?
That was a kind of work that was, I don't hear a lot about it now. I heard a lot about it in the 90s. I think it was called transactional analysis, where you kind of, you have your inner child, and then you have your adult child, adult person, and there's like three parts. And so they would help people connect with that. Like I said, I don't hear a lot about that anymore. I'm sure it was helpful for some people. I don't know. I don't know a whole lot about it. But no, that's not what we do. We sit and we talk. So about whatever the person wants to talk about, I keep their goals in mind, try and kind of march them towards those goals.
That's very interesting. Now, what is the difference between someone who's like have anxiety disorder or someone who's depressed? Where is the difference in that? Can you
Okay.
talk about both?
Yeah, I mean, depression is, and differentiating again between depression and sad feelings or depression and a low mood. So it's very normal to have sad feelings when you have a crisis that's happened or you have a loss. Uh, you It's also normal to have a low mood if you've been working hard and you're exhausted and maybe things aren't quite going the way you want in life. So that is not the same as depression. So depression is more where you have, and there's different kinds of depression. They've categorized them, but you have a low mood. You have changes in your appetite. You have changes in your sleep pattern. You've lost interest in most of your activities. Things that used to bring you pleasure just don't bring them anymore. You're possibly withdrawing, maybe acting out in some kind of addiction to try and cover over the depressed feelings and self-medicate yourself. Um, so depression is different than anxiety. It's a different experience.
Does depression only be solved by medication, or you can?
No, there's different kinds of. Um, I, for me, medication is the big guns. It's kind of something you try when all the non-pharmaceutical interventions have failed. So for someone experiencing depression and even anxiety, I think a good place to start is a full physical by your doctor. They can rule out things that might be biological, your thyroid, your hormones, whatever else they think would be important to look at in you. So they'll run labs and they'll try and see if try and rule out any kind of obvious biological reason. And I think after that, there are support groups and there's naturopathic doctors that are licensed now that can, kind of look at you and look at those same labs and maybe come up with a different conclusion that your MD came up with and prescribe some kind of supplementation. There's therapy groups, support groups. There's various kinds of therapy, which I think people don't quite understand that fact, that they have choices in therapy. Um, Self-help books. So there's a lot of different interventions. There's neurofeedback, biofeedback.
That's that's very interesting. So what you're saying is, and people who are watching, and they're gonna watch this show. I know there's thousands of people, 1,800 downloads a week. So I know that as what you're saying, Andrea, is like, go do a physical before you say, oh well, I have depression and stuff, and and try that. Maybe it could be a thyroid, could be some other, biological issue, and then after that, they come see you, and then you can recommend a group or therapy group that they can meet with, or other books. That's very interesting. I never
Yeah.
looked at it that way, but you're right. That could be something in their body that's causing them to do that. Now, why do you think right now, as like uh, the impact of COVID, where we're seeing
Mm.
and we're hearing a lot of, take your
Can, can,
time with that topic, with that quarantine and all that.
well, before we move on to that, can I backtrack a little? Because there's
Yes, please.
something yeah. People think that going to therapy is kind of like going to a grocery store where they're all the same. What you get at Ralph's, you can get at Vaughn's and get at Albertsons, and that's really a mistaken thought. Um, Therapists are different in more than just the obvious ways. Of course, they're different in gender, age, experience, whether they're faith-based, not faith-based, whether they're pastoral counselors or psychologists. So there's those obvious differences, but there's also differences that are a little more unseen, and that's the modality that the therapist practices. And some modalities are better suited to certain problems. So people can educate themselves on, for instance, what is cognitive behavioral therapy? What is dialectical behavioral therapy? What is neurofeedback, biofeedback? What's psychodynamic? What is somatic therapies? There's many different therapies that therapists use. And they typically, you have some that are eclectic and they'll integrate, but oftentimes they are psychodynamic, they'll use one modality and that's kind of their thing. So a client can kind of read about these things and kind of think, well, what do I think might help me more? And the other thing that people don't understand is that when you go on your insurance and you look for a therapist that's in your network, you're going to see that they specialize, right? But they often specialize in 30 different things, which we know is impossible. We can't specialize in 30 things. So they might have experience in 30 things, but you want to look at really what do they specialize in.
That's interesting. Can you give little detail on some of the modalities that they use? That just for
Yeah,
few, yeah,
yeah.
just so they
Um,
know the difference.
a popular one right now is dialectical behavior therapy, and it pretty much approaches four areas. It looks at building your interpersonal skills. It looks at helping you to manage uh, challenging feelings, increasing your capacity to deal with negative feelings. It deals with helping you to regulate emotions. And a topic that's hot now is mindfulness, that ability to kind of be in the present instead of always, sitting out in your mind. So cognitive behavioral is not just think a happy thought, but it's more helping somebody get to the beliefs that drive their thoughts and feelings. Very biblical. Psychodynamic, that's kind of more what you were talking about. But years ago, they used to lay on couches. They don't anymore that I know of. Um, but that's where they're looking at past hurts, family of origins issues that have created ways that you think and feel, and try and help you get back to that, get some insight about them, and have that corrective emotional experience with the therapist. Um, Neurofeedback is a brain training. Biofeedback is with the sensors, they help you regulate your heart rate and your your blood pressure and your tenseness. So there's many different kinds of treatments.
That's
I just named
all
a
right.
few.
Now, as far as let's say before we get to the question that I asked you about the impact of COVID, there's another question. How common is depression? It seems you hear people are depressed all the time nowadays. We never used to hear this term while growing up. Why are
Well,
we hearing about that now? Mental
I think
illnesses.
part of it, the term is misused sometimes. It's people are talking about, I feel sad, I'm having a low mood, I'm crying, therefore I'm depressed. So I think part of it is a misuse of the term, it's the vernacular. I think otherwise, it's another reason is because we live, I think, in such a fast-paced society now. Um, a lot of socialization is done online, and thank God for it, because some people would have no social life at all if it wasn't for their computer and their Facebook. But I think we've missed that living together, doing life together in a community. And even the church is struggling, I think, to find a way to recapture that. That's why big churches have small groups, and they're always trying to push people to get in a small group, because you're not going to make a friend in a congregation of 2,000 otherwise.
That's true.
And I think the work, I mean, how hard it is to work and earn a living, and the pressures of supporting a family now in these times.
You're right. You're right. Okay, so let's get back to our question. Why? Well, how did COVID and quarantine and all that impacted people and causing more anxiety and depression in people?
Okay. Um, well, COVID shut everything down. people people were used to, and I think the degree to which somebody's life changed uh, would be the degree of anxiety and depression. So first we have the anxiety of a pandemic that no one really understands, and we're being told by the media all kinds of contradictory information about it. So who knows what to believe? Um, so we have that. So there's the fear of that, and then it shut life down. So I mean, if somebody was already working from home and they're home educating their life probably didn't change as much. But for people whose kids went to school and they're working out of the home, their life changed drastically, and they were cut off from, their social connections, cut off from, face-to-face church, trying to do everything on Zoom. I think it was a very isolating period, and then you compound it with the financial stressors. I mean, how many people were trying to limp by on unemployment and feed their family on it and pay their mortgage?
Right. So that's impacting, and you think by getting back to normal, getting back to schools and work and all that, hopefully that would take care of the problem.
I'm not
Uh,
sure because right now we're supposedly getting back, but we hear a lot of mixed uh, conversation going on about this, whether COVID's on a resurge and it's affecting both the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. So I think we're seeing people's anxiety starting to go up again, and kind of wondering, how this is going to affect them. They were just starting to find some relief, and now here we go again. That's the mentality right now, I think.
so uh, is there okay? I think I don't know. We covered this a little bit. What about parents with children who suffer from anxiety and depression, and they will insist, "I will not take medication." How do you deal with that?
Well, I don't have to deal with it. I mean, that's the psychiatrist's job ultimately to kind of convince them of the best path. But once again, I try and address their resistance to it. I do try and see if they've done all the things prior to it. Has the child had a physical? Have you consulted a naturopathic doctor? Have you tried various forms of counseling? What have you tried? Did they try one that was well matched to the child's problems, and someone who specializes in working with children? I would take them through all those steps, and then if they've tried all of this and their child's misery continues, and they're still resistant, I guess I would have to ask them what's more important to them, how their child's feeling or their fears of the medication. Where will not having the medication lead their child over the years? Um, so I would just try and walk them through their fears and their concerns and get that referral done quickly.
Good. Now, how, what do you call it? For example, I was, one time, one of my children, I took her to this naturopathic
Hmm.
doctors. Of course, they took 1500 immediately before anything else. And I'm not complaining. I'm venting. People used to me to vent. And then she said, she took my daughter's arm, lifted it up in the air, and
So
said, "Oh, I can. I know what's going on. I feel what's going on." And then they put them on a bed with oxygen coming from under them, and they said that's a therapy. What do you think of all that, personally?
I think you saw more of that earlier in the days when the naturopathic field wasn't regulated. So naturopathic doctors have California licensing requirements, at least in this state now. I don't know about other states. And I think even if you're seeing someone who's doing that, you're probably seeing someone who is just a little bit more on the fringe. But there are many naturopathic doctors that are very mainstream, but they're just uh, very well versed in treating with supplements, homeopathy, diet, uh, things like that. So just like with a therapist, you have to kind of research the person and know who you're sending your child to, who you're bringing them to. Same with a naturopathic doctor.
Right. Are you busier than ever now?
I have been in the past, I would say, month or two since things have opened up. I have gotten very busy. I am even taking more clients. I kind of semi-retired at this point, but I'm even increasing clients because they can't find a place to go. And then the other thing is also a lot of clients don't have $150, $125, $200 to spend on counseling. So we have a sliding scale at Journey, and we try never to turn anyone away. So um, I'm busy for that reason too. I
I
get
understand that.
referrals. I get referrals from churches and other therapists, and oftentimes it's for sliding scale people.
I understand that because we're calling, and they found out that most of the psychologists I don't even have the time, and they stopped accepting insurances. They said we'll send you a super bill, you submit it. We're not going to deal with insurance. We're extremely busy, so it's just like everybody is now going to counseling. Rossetti said the cost of living is so high here in San Francisco. Four of the five voices in my head had to move out. Is that
Great.
schizophrenic? We used to call it schizophrenia. What do you call it now? Bipolar or what is it? Schizophrenia?
No,
No,
unfortunately, anyone with a psychotic, disorder of some type can hear voices. It's very,
they they can hear voices.
yeah,
So if you hear voices, you have a problem, right?
yeah, I think so.
What if people who said I'm talking to someone, an imaginary person, and they're still like kids in their teens, and said I'm talking to someone,
I would
like a
check to see if,
personality from the past.
yeah, I would check to see if they have their headphones and mic in.
Okay, so it is a problem, right? When they
Yeah, but this is something that's kind of comical when these things first came out, or especially the what do you call the ones that don't have any wires?
Yeah, yeah, the earpods, yeah.
Yeah, those earbuds. The incidence of seeing people walking around appearing like they're talking to themselves has greatly increased. And I think if you took somebody from like 60 years ago and you could time warp them in and they walked around now, they would think the whole society was insane.
That yeah, that's we're going crazy. Now, single people, how can single people avoid getting depressed, especially when they feel the clock is ticking, they need to be married, or the pressure of society? What do you say to single people so they can avoid that anxiety or depression and all that?
I'm not sure that the goal of life is to avoid anxiety or depression, but to understand it and use it, work through it, and get to a better place. Because there's something in that is very character building for us. I think that's why God doesn't zap us all out of our problems. I remember reading, I think it was in either John
Uh-oh.
Townsend or Henry Cloud. They talked about how Jesus had the option to have like instant glory, instant gratification, instant need meeting when he was, being challenged by Satan in the 40 days. But he chose the way of the cross. So because it led to something greater. And I think sometimes we go that way too because it leads to something greater that God's trying to do in us. Um, so it's not avoiding anxiety and depression, but understanding it and working through it is the goal. But for single people, they they have a challenge because of course, obviously they're alone, and how big that challenge is can also depend on their past. If they've been somebody who's had trouble forming relationships all their life, if they have trauma in the past abandonments, rejections, um, this the fact of being single is going to inhibit their ability to improve their life sometimes, and depression is a greater risk for them. For those who don't have those past things, there's a lot that they can do. They can get involved in a ministry to bring them alongside of people and increase their chances of meeting a mate. They can involve themselves in small groups, find groups, hobby groups, hiking, martial arts, things that bring them into contact with people that have interests like them. They can pray and ask God to make those efforts fruitful. If all of those things don't work and they can't find their people somehow, or they don't have the energy to, then I think they might fit in that first category and they might need some help.
Perfect. Now, there's some people who claim self-prescribe ADD and ADHD, and they're like, "Hey, I'm ADD or I'm ADHD," or just because, they're just can't focus. What do you say to those people? How can you know you have ADD or you don't?
All these diagnostic words, ADD, ADHD, depression, anxiety, they're basically just terminology so that we can understand clusters of symptoms without having to say it. It's kind of like rather than saying to you, Nazareth, my nose is running, I have a scratchy throat, my ears itch, and I'm sneezing a lot. What do I get to tell you? I have
Cold.
a cold. So, so understanding that that's what these words are, they're terminologies to shortcut conversation, and so a doctor, another person understands. So, not so sure as an adult if it's important to get diagnosed officially, but if you see that you have features of attention issues, if you see that you hop from thing to thing, if you see those symptoms, then there are things that you can begin to do to help yourself.
Mm. Okay. So okay, we hear a lot about autism more than ever before. How can a mother know if her child have autism, or someone know that their young kid has autism but they never prescribe anything to them, or they never follow through with that? How can they tell?
So I guess we depends really on the age that we're talking about, but anytime a parent sees that their child's development isn't kind of there's prior to age 3, I'm going to regress. Prior to age 3, there's a wide variance in how kids develop. So it's really hard to know. But if parents see something or things going on that seem atypical to them, I think the first stop is your primary care physician. They've become very good at understanding the earlier warning signs of autism and helping parents get early intervention. But so anytime a parent sees that their child's development is just doesn't seem to be falling within, the typical, they're falling behind their peers, that's the time to begin looking to understand what it is. I mean, there's common features of autism. A parent can read them online. Autism, high-functioning autism, what they used to call Asperger's syndrome on the higher spectrum. And if they
Mm.
see that their child displays those behaviors, your primary care physician is probably your first step. And if you want to pursue an evaluation, then there are the regional centers or private clinics that will do a full battery of tests depending on the age of the child to see if they indeed do fall into that category.
Perfect. Now, what do you say to pastors who say, "Well, I took a class in counseling. I don't need to send someone further. I can handle this." What do you say to that?
I would say that, um, well, first I would say I don't know many pastors nowadays in that mindset. I think, but there might still be some. It was a very common mindset a couple decades ago when I first started doing this. So I do think there is an arrogance in that and a fear. So the pastor's fear is that they're going to send someone somewhere or make a referral, and that referral is going to be incompetent or unspiritual or lead their congregational member down the wrong path. So for a pastor like that who thinks that way, I would first ask if that's even a biblical mindset, but then also encourage them to develop a what do you call a referral system, a group of people that he feels very safe referring to. He can call them and say, I'm looking for therapists I can refer congregational members to. Will you meet with me? They can ask questions. You can get a feel for who the person is.
Hmm.
Um, and once again, that pastor would be in some kind of a theology too that believes that everything has to be handled by a pastor. Uh,
I have a fan in my one of my fans that mentioned that they loved their dad so much. She loved her dad so much, and then at one point, her dad was very sick to the point that they asked her to make a decision to pull the plug,
mm,
and she did that. And now, few years later, she's still in that depressed or panic, or she gets so horrible. I don't know the exact feelings, but what do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, grief is always challenging, but when grief is complicated, they call it complicated grief, by a situation like that, and a person just can't seem to get through. I think it is time to get some help. There are grief groups in the Christian church. There's, it's called Grief Share. So a lot of the larger churches have Grief Share. So that would be a place to start, where you can talk with other people. Maybe it kind of takes you through a program. But there also are therapists who specialize in grief therapy and complicated grief to help somebody to move past that. But I mean, some of the issues would be, sounds like the person might feel like she had an active part in her mother's death, or she did something against God's will, or um, there
Hmm.
could be many things from the past in her relationship with her mom that are also complicating the situation. So for that, if somebody hasn't moved beyond the active phases of their grief, I would say within about 6 months, then I would say to find some kind of assistance. And I don't mean you're totally over your grief in 6 months, but you're not, you're functioning again. But if you're
Yeah.
not functioning, you're still dwelling, and it's still really tormenting you. It really is time to get some assistance.
Now, what about, do you think some people are overweight because of there's something mental about it, some either depression or, and what do you think?
That's a very good question, and I
Okay.
will tap answer on that one a little bit.
Okay.
So, so overweight, that can be biological. Some people have hormone disorders, the thyroid. I mean, there's just a couple others are not coming to my head right now. So once again, first stop, doctor, um, and then maybe a weight management program if nothing is really wrong or what's wrong is corrected. But eating can be an eating disorder, and very much like drug addiction, alcohol addiction, where a person eats in order to self-soothe, control the natural cycles of life, the ups and downs. They don't want to experience the lows, so they try and keep things at a high. So there are things, something called an eating disorder, and that is something that help is available. There's behavioral help, things like Weight Watchers. There's therapy and therapy groups, and there's also more extreme measures for severely obese. But usually, I've seen 3 people do those extreme measures, and if they don't do therapy and begin to understand the reasons why they overeat, then typically they have the surgery, the bariatric surgery, but then shortly thereafter, a year or 2 down the line, they're putting on the pounds again.
I've seen that, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Now you do marriage counseling, right?
I do work with couples. Yes,
Have you ever got in the middle of a big physical fight? Were you in the middle of that or no?
no, I have. I have at times had to tell couples that I don't think they're a candidate for marital counseling with me, that I think they need individual, so that they can go and work on their issues separately and then bring them back, into marital counseling a little bit down the road. Um, but I've never had that happen. What
Oh,
you
so
described.
so is what I'm hearing, just to understand this. So you're saying if a couple has issues in their marriage, it's better to go to separate counselors first and then do
Not
marriage
always.
counseling?
Not
Not
always.
always.
But for somebody to benefit from counseling in, marital counseling, couples counseling, they have to be somewhat inside oriented, somewhat able to, somewhat self-reflective, somewhat able to maybe own a little bit of something. But if you have 2 people where they're they're both so, so injured, so that they can't even work together in a couple setting at all, then my recommendation is that they go and do individual first, kind of clear the decks a little bit, so to speak, and then
Mm.
come back and try marital counseling.
Well, I run a ministry also, not other than the comedy. It's called Voice of the Refugees, which is dealing with people from Middle Eastern country and Eastern countries. And one of the challenges we have is the male is a narcissist, the husband is a narcissist, or they what they're like, they think their wives, the cultural thing where the wife is just the, I mean, some of them it gets to where they become physically abusive, spousal abuse, and we have to report it and we have to call the cops for them. But what do you say to narcissism, or how do you deal, if someone is a narcissist, you think there's hope for them?
So the word narcissist is used in so many ways. It's a
Mm.
vernacular again, and it's kind of evolved to be just, used to, somebody who is kind of self-consumed, uh, and on a power trip, you know. But there's a clinical narcissism, that can be diagnosed by a professional, that involves it's the inability really to see the other person as separate from you. So there's, 2 different things. So I think you're talking about somebody who is very self-absorbed and on a power trip. And culturally, their culture gives them permission to be so because it fits in the
Right.
gender norms, right?
Right.
Okay. Yeah. So, to be honest, I've not worked with that culture, so I don't have a lot of experience there, probably that much to offer, except that first understanding the culture and where they're able to get that information that they're then misusing.
Mm.
So somewhere in the culture, there's a belief or a way of behaving between the genders that this person in his brokenness is able to misuse and in the relationship to get more power and to have more control. Uh,
Now, now, as far as what do you call it? Shoot, I completely blanked out for the question, but uh, you mentioned clinical, what do you call it, narcissism. What is that? That's where is that? There's a hope for that either.
oh, absolutely. There are therapists who specialize in personality disorders and narcissism, borderline personality disorder. These, fit in those categories. So there's an article that Dr. Laura Haynes. She was a person I did a lot of case consultation with in my early days, and she wrote an article called I think it's Have You Fed Your Sheep Today? So she helps pastors understand the differences between narcissists and borderlines and people who would more be classified as neurotic, and then how to minister to those varying needs of their population. And she used to give this talk quite a bit at churches all over the area back in the early 90s, I think mid 90s it was. It was very good. I have a copy of it still.
What is borderline? What is that?
So you can look it up online. You can like look at the diagnostic criteria for borderline personality disorder, but usually, from what I remember, they're characterized by extreme, a difficult time in controlling emotion. Their greatest fear is being abandoned, and if they perceive abandonment, it can really trigger them into uh, addictive behaviors or acting out behaviors, anger. Um, so you could read that. For narcissists, it's more they're according to James Masterson. His take on a narcissist is someone who has a difficult time differentiating themselves from someone else. In other words, they kind of experience everyone as an actor on their stage, and so they don't have an easy time interacting with people according to the other person's needs, the other person's wishes. Hard time differentiating between your feelings and my feelings. Everything's a little bit melded together.
Wow. Now, is there a free help for people who cannot afford to go to a regular therapist or a psychologist and all that? Is there help available for free?
There are ministries. Free help is never beneficial, to be honest with you. I stopped giving free help, not because I'm stingy or greedy or want more money, but because free help causes someone to really not respect the time. So if free help is the ones that the people that often no show the sessions, um, you know, it's not appreciated. So even if this person is paying $10 a session, $5 a session, I believe there should always be an investment in it. So if you're talking about low fee help, uh, you have to look at clinics and counseling centers, find a trainee or an intern who's working under supervision of a marriage family therapist or a licensed psychologist. Um, and that's where you get the free help or the low cost help.
Okay. And now it says we discuss what kind of assistance are available to people struggling with anxiety or depression. There are things people don't know and aren't usually talked about that can help people to find assistance better suited for them. Can
Well,
you?
yeah, I think we covered that when we talked about the
Yeah.
different kinds of therapies and
Right.
the modalities and different kinds of help that is available to people.
Okay, now how can people get a hold of your practice or hold of you if they want, to have the service, or they want some counseling or therapy?
Or if they want a referral, they want help finding a referral. My number is 951-545-1932. JourneyChristianMinistries.org, O-R-G, www.journeychristianministries.org.
And your prices are very reasonable, and you actually take it as a donation, not as you know, covered by insurance and all that. You just take it. Is that true? That's correct, right? Just
We have a couple of different ways people can choose to pay, and that's all explained in the initial paperwork. Um, so, yeah, that is true. We have a sliding scale for people. We try not to turn people away. I mean, sometimes it's just impossible, though. I might have to put people on the waiting list sometimes. But
right. Well, in closing, I know this has been great. I just, as someone who's been in the pastoral ministry and counseling, there's people who are watching, listening, and people who's going to listen a year or so or more from now. What kind of encouragement, Christian lifting up that you can give them in the last 5 minutes here?
um, that's a really good question. I would say, and something we didn't talk about much because we talked about mental health so much and anxiety, depression, and autism and COVID, but we didn't talk about scripture much. And I know a lot of people are conditioned to reading scripture and seeing all the negatives. They see the judgments. They see you know all the expectations.
Oh,
Especially people with anxiety disorders, they often read scripture and they don't find comfort because they're seeing all these things they can't live up to, and that just makes them more anxious. So for people, I would say to focus in on scriptures that are comforting, that are uplifting, that talk about being anxious, and know that God isn't saying that this is where you should be. He's saying that He's coming alongside of us and He's got things in control and He will walk us through the journey, and He's not freaked out by our imperfections and
mm,
He's not freaked out by our sins and our struggles. He really is there as a God who loves us. He has us engraved in the palm of His hand, it says. He tells us to be still and know that He is God. And what that means is that He is God, we're not. That we can be still before Him and just trust that He's going to work our lives out. He's going to get us through this, even though we can't see how.
that's awesome. Thank you so much, Andrea, for your time. Thank you very much. I want to encourage the listeners and we were watching. If you need any help, we already gave you the information how to get a hold of Journey Christian Ministries and the phone number, and we'll put that also at the end of the program. So thank you so much, Andrea, for your time. I really
Thank you for
appreciate
having
it.
me. Now
Oh,
you have a few
anytime.
minutes to be funny, right?
No, this is serious. This is, I know we couldn't be funny about this show because there's people struggling, and if we joke about anything, it's harder for comedians nowadays to be, to talk about mental illness and joke about, it used to be easy to joke about suicide and all that, but you can't do anymore. In fact, I wrote a joke, and I mean, just you tell me. I mean, uh, it was just a joke, and I said, my kid was sitting at the dinner table. He goes, "Yeah, I just want to kill myself." I said, "Well, then stop eating because nobody returns a leased car full of gas." And then people like, "Oh," I said, "Listen, I used to take it lightly, but when your kids say something about I want to kill myself." I said, please take it seriously. I'm the type of guy, and if my daughter's taking too long in the shower, I'm knocking on the door. Hey, can I get you a life jacket or something? Do something. See, now you're laughing. See, that's where the comedy comes in. But once you get in the topic, everybody's like, "Ooh, you can't talk about that."
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so Thank you so much for what you do. I know you're helping a lot of people, and I would love to have you back on the show sometime soon.
Thank you, and God bless.
God bless. Bye bye. All right, guys. So thank you for watching and listening to this podcast. Again, I want to remind you that every night, weeknight at 8:30 p.m. Pacific time, we're on Facebook under Live with Naz. An hour of laughter and encouragement. So if you feel anxious, a little depressed, you need some laughter, join us every weeknight at 8:30 p.m. Pacific time under Comedian Nazareth on Facebook. Love you guys. Thank you so much for watching this podcast. Please encourage your friends to listen and watch this. And may you guys have an awesome, awesome, great day. We'll see you later. Thank you.